12 banned Japanese cars that automakers don't want you to remember. Japan's automakers have built some of the wildest machines the world wasn't supposed to see. Some were too fast, too raw, or just too ahead of their time. One even got banned for being too powerful in a body that looked more like a family sedan than a sports car. Let's get into it. 12th, 1990 Nissan 300ZX twin-turbo Z32. From forgotten grocery getter to import outlaw, this next one had no business being this fast. You'd expect the kind of car banned from youth driver lists and scrutinized by insurance firms to wear some aggressive badge. But not this one. It looks sleek, sure, but also tame enough to pass as just another 90s Japanese coupe until you got behind the wheel. Under its sculpted hood sat a 3.0-liter twin-turbocharged V6, pushing out 300 horsepower and 283 pound-feet of torque. Figures that were dangerously close to supercar territory at the time. It could launch from 0 to 60 in just 5 seconds flat, a number that turned heads in 1990 and caused headaches for policymakers in places like Australia, and parts of the U.S. insurance companies flagged it. Licensing boards restricted it, and quietly it slipped off sales lists for younger drivers in multiple regions. The car, built with finesse, it had four-wheel steering, electronic suspension damping, and a chassis that could handle twisty mountain roads like it was born there. But its biggest sin? Accessibility. It gave regular folks too much power for too little money, and the authorities didn't love that mix. This wasn't a Ferrari for the elite. It was a missile with taillights you could park at Walmart. Even Nissan didn't push it hard after the initial buzz. Maintenance was expensive, the twin turbos needed care, and the car's complexity led to reliability complaints over time. Still, for a few glorious years, it gave sports cars twice its price a reason to sweat. Next up is something even rarer, one that looked stripped down, basic, even boring, but it was deliberately built to outrun almost anything in its class, and authorities weren't ready for it. 11. 1993 Subaru Legacy RS Type RA. It had no power windows, no sound insulation, no airbags, and that was exactly the point. The next car wasn't built for comfort, it was built to win. While other sedans were chasing luxury badges, this one stripped everything out in the name of speed. Most people glanced past it in the 90s, mistaking it for just another fleet car. But under the surface, a rally-bred monster. This version of Subaru's midsize sedan came with a badge most people didn't understand. RS Type RA. What it stood for was simple: race altered. It packed a 2.0-liter turbocharged flat-4 engine, pushing around 237 horsepower and 228 pound-feet of torque, mated to a closed-ratio 5-speed transmission and an all-wheel drive system tuned for gravel, not pavement. This wasn't your average family car. It was a homologation special built to qualify Subaru for Group A rally. And because every kilogram mattered, it was brutally bare bones. No ABS, no fog lights. Even the roof was thin to shave weight. The goal? Build a sedan that could get sideways at 100 miles per hour and still beg for more. The problem came when importers tried to bring it into the US. The lack of airbags and key crash safety features got it flagged and denied by the DOT, while emissions hurdles sealed its fate in states like California. Only a handful ever made it through, and even fewer are still street legal. But what really makes this car legendary isn't just what it lacked, it's what it secretly inspired. There's a reason one of Subaru's most iconic performance cars owes its existence to this stripped-down anomaly. But that's a story tied to a car that never even left Japan. 10. 1989 Mazda Eunos Cosmo 20B. From the outside, it looked like a luxury cruiser built for quiet drives and soft jazz. But under the hood, chaos. In the late 80s, Mazda wasn't just experimenting, they were rewriting the rules. And this next car proved it. Sold only in Japan, it didn't just offer premium leather and digital gadgets. It came with an engine that almost no country wanted to deal with. The Eunos Cosmo wasn't some ordinary Grand Tourer. It was the first and only production car to feature a 20B3-rotor Wankel engine paired with twin sequential turbochargers. That setup delivered 280 horsepower and 297 pound-feet of torque, launching this luxury coupe from 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds, a number unheard of for something this big and plush in 1989. But performance wasn't the only wild part. The Cosmo featured a touchscreen infotainment system, GPS navigation, and electronic climate control, years before most brands even knew what that was. Mazda had created a tech flagship. The problem? It was too advanced and far too thirsty. The rotary engine, with its high emissions and fuel consumption, never stood a chance against tightening global regulations. Importers trying to bring the 20 billion Cosmo into the US were met with red tape, failed emissions tests, and sky-high conversion costs. It was never sold outside Japan, and those that did sneak through were often banned from registration or left to sit in garages untouched and unregistered. Mazda shelved the engine. The world forgot the car, but the next one on this list, it had 12 cylinders, cost more than a Porsche, and still got banned. Even Toyota didn't want you knowing they ever made it. 9. 1996 Toyota Century V12. It wasn't built to race. It wasn't even built to be sold to you. And that's exactly why governments didn't want it crossing borders. At first glance, this next car seemed like something reserved for CEOs, diplomats, and royalty. And in Japan, it was. But beneath its stoic, old-money appearance was something no one expected from Toyota, a 5.0-liter V12 engine, the only one the brand has ever built. Silent, smooth, and absurdly powerful, it delivered 276 horsepower and 355 pound-feet of torque, though insiders have long claimed it was underrated by design. The 1996 Toyota Century V12 wasn't about flashy numbers. It was about untouchable presence. Built by hand, wrapped in the thickest soundproofing in any Toyota to date, it had rear seat controls that rivaled private jets, and a ride so isolated you couldn't hear the outside world even if you tried. But here's where it gets interesting. Toyota never exported it, not to protect exclusivity, but to avoid the regulatory chaos that came with a big displacement V12. The car couldn't meet U.S. emission standards. Euro safety laws were even more unforgiving. In Japan, they kept it for themselves. Some units that made it overseas through private imports ended up blacklisted, unregisterable, or slapped with massive taxes. Toyota pretended it didn't exist outside Japan. Why build a V12 they knew no one else could legally drive? That's the question. But coming up next, a car that was designed to dominate rally stages and instead got accused of cheating its way to victory. And that accusation nearly killed it forever. Like what you're seeing. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of these buried legends, because the next ones only get wilder. 8. 1994 Toyota Celica GT4 ST205. This one was born to race, built to win, and banned in disgrace. Toyota had a point to prove in the early 90s, and they aimed straight at the World Rally Championship. The result? A car that looked like a sporty liftback, but underneath wore battle armor. The 1994 Celica GT4 ST205 with a 2.0-liter turbocharged 3SGTE engine, producing 252 horsepower and 239 pound-feet of torque, paired with an advanced all-wheel drive system and super strut suspension lifted straight from Toyota's motorsport division. This was Toyota's most powerful rally homologation car ever. Built with over 2,500 units for public roads, it wasn't just fast, it was razor sharp. But then came the scandal. During the 1995 WRC season, the ST205 was banned after being caught with an illegal turbo restrictor bypass. A sophisticated cheat so well hidden, FIA officials called it the most ingenious device they'd ever seen. Toyota was slapped with a season-long ban, and the car's reputation never recovered. Even outside the rally world, trouble followed. Emissions regulations in the U.S. kept it out. Insurance companies flagged it as high risk. Some countries limited its road use due to its competition-derived parts. And slowly, Toyota distanced itself from the whole thing. But here's the real debate. Was the ban justified, or was Toyota just the first to get caught doing what everyone else was already doing? Drop a comment and let me know. Now, the next car didn't get banned for bending the rules. It got targeted just for being too much, too fast, too light, and too pure to be street legal. And the automaker behind it wasn't even part of the big three. 7. The 1993 Mazda RX-7 FD3S. It looked like a concept car that accidentally made it to production. Low, wide, and impossibly sleek. But that wasn't what got it banned. The 1993 Mazda RX-7 FD3S wasn't just a sports car. It was a statement. It came armed with a 1.3-liter twin-rotor Wankel engine, twin sequential turbos, and a chassis so balanced it could shame cars twice its price. On paper, it only made 255 horsepower and 217 pound-feet of torque, but the way it delivered that power, high revving, relentless, and scalpel sharp, was unlike anything else on the road. It did 0 to 60 in just 5.3 seconds and handled like it was built for a racetrack. But the RX-7's brilliance came at a cost. The rotary engine was compact and potent, but also temperamental and thirsty. In markets like the US, the FD quickly became known for its high maintenance needs, poor fuel economy, and failing emissions tests. Insurance companies flagged it, mechanics struggled with it, and regulators, they didn't want to deal with it. By the late 90s, the RX-7 was quietly pulled from several markets, not with headlines, but with silence. Emissions rules tightened, import laws got tougher, and by the early 2000s, the FD had all but vanished from US showrooms. In some countries, gray market imports were banned outright, unless heavily modified or grandfathered in. Mazda Mazda never replaced it. The RX-8 tried, but it wasn't the same. The FD had become a legend and a liability. 1995 Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 3. It looked like a commuter sedan with a wing, but underneath, it was a rally-bred threat that regulators didn't want on public roads. The 1995 Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 3 was never meant to be subtle. It was the sharpest version of the first-generation Evos, lighter, faster, and angrier than anything else in its segment. Under the hood sat a 2.0-liter turbocharged inline-4, pushing out 270 horsepower and 228 pound-feet of torque through a close-ratio 5-speed transmission and a finely tuned all-wheel drive system. It could hit 0 to 60 in just under 5 seconds while looking like something parked outside a middle school. This wasn't just a sports sedan, it was Mitsubishi's rally weapon for Group A, disguised in a 4-door body. It had aggressive aero, a lightweight chassis, and a rawness that felt more like race car than road car. And that's exactly what got it in trouble. The Evo 3 was never officially sold in the US. Mitsubishi feared the cost of emissions testing, crash certifications, and safety retrofitting would outweigh potential sales, so it stayed locked in Japan and a few select markets. Enthusiasts who tried importing them often hit roadblocks, custom seizures, denied registrations, and unfit for road use stamps from departments that didn't want to deal with non-compliant gray market vehicles. Some Evo 3s were lucky, brought in under special exemptions or show and display rules, but most didn't make it, and even now in some regions, it's still blacklisted due to unclear documentation or modified parts. Mitsubishi never apologized. They just moved on with newer evolutions. But this one, it stayed a forbidden icon. Coming up next is a car so controversial, it sparked an investigation, exposed a loophole, and got one importer shut down by the government. And the car at the center of it, you've definitely heard the name. 2002 Nissan Skyline GTR R34. It was the poster car of a generation, and yet in the eyes of the US government, it was too dangerous, too untested, and too illegal to drive. The 2002 Nissan Skyline GTR R34 is worshipped today, but back in the early 2000s, owning one in the US wasn't just rare, it was nearly impossible. Equipped with the legendary RB26D ETT 2.6-liter twin-turbo inline-6, it pushed 276 horsepower officially, though real output was closer to 330 horsepower and 289 pound-feet of torque, paired with an ATTE SA all-wheel drive system and Super HICAS rear-wheel steering. It could rocket from 0 to 60 in about 4.9 seconds, and with the right driver, it could embarrass supercars on both the drag strip and the track. But there was a catch, and it was massive. The R34 was never homologated for the US market. Nissan knew it wouldn't pass federal crash tests or EPA emissions regulations without major costly modifications, so they never officially brought it over. That didn't stop a California company called Motorex from trying. They imported R34s and claimed to federalize them, but after investigations revealed they faked certifications, skipped safety modifications, and cut corners, the government stepped in, seizing cars, banning further imports, and shutting Motorex down entirely. Overnight, the R34 became a symbol of forbidden speed. People who owned one faced registrations revoked, insurance dropped, and cars taken by customs. Even today, only select model years under the 25-year import rule are legal to own in the US, and they're worth 6 figures or more. It wasn't banned for being unsafe. It was banned because no one was willing to make it safe. Up next, a car so rare and so strange, it looked like a garage-built experiment. But it wasn't a kit car. It came straight from Japan's underground engineering scene. 2000 Tommykaira ZZ. It had no airbags, no ABS, no stability control, and that's exactly why almost no country would let it in. The 2000 Tommykaira ZZ wasn't built by a major automaker. It came from a small Japanese tuning house with big ambitions. Designed from the ground up as a pure driver's machine, it ditched comfort and safety in favor of raw, unfiltered performance. We're talking about a 700-kilogram aluminum-bodied sports car powered by a 2.0-liter, naturally aspirated DOHC inline-4, borrowed from Nissan, producing around 190 horsepower. That doesn't sound like much, until you realize it had the same power-to-weight ratio as a Ferrari. The ZZ wasn't just quick, it was electric in its response. With 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 4.5 seconds, a low-slung stance, and lightning-fast handling, it became a cult legend in Japan almost overnight. But that's where it stayed, because the rest of the world, they didn't want it. The Tommykaira ZZ failed to meet even the most basic crash safety standards in Europe and the US. No airbags meant instant rejection. Its hand-built nature meant no large-scale testing, and emissions regulations, forget it. Even Japan itself started tightening rules, and production was halted after just a few dozen were made. Attempts to bring the car overseas were met with red tape, denied registrations, and insurance refusals. To this day, only a handful exist outside Japan, and most are track-only toys. And Tommykaira? They faded into obscurity just as quickly as they rose, with the ZZ quietly disappearing from public view. But next up is a car that did come from a major automaker, Nissan to be exact. It was fast, aggressive, and built to dominate races, yet authorities slammed the door shut on it before it even had a chance. Want to catch the rest of these forgotten legends? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. 3. 1987 Nissan Skyline GTS-R. It was the prequel to a legend, a car that laid the groundwork for the GTR's return, but few outside Japan ever got to see it in action. The 1987 Nissan Skyline GTS-R HR31 was built for one reason: to dominate Group A touring car racing. Nissan needed to homologate the platform, so they produced exactly 800 units of this razor-edge variant, just enough to meet FIA regulations. It came armed with a 2.0-liter turbocharged RB20 DETR inline-6, pushing out 210 horsepower and 181 pound-feet of torque, but with heavy factory over-engineering, thicker con rods, a reinforced block, and a massive T04 turbo that made it beg to be tuned. It wasn't flashy. It didn't wear the iconic GTR badge, but underneath, it was a purebred competitor. Tuners quickly realized its potential. With minor upgrades, it could outperform cars with twice the displacement. It carved out a cult following in Japan's underground street scene and was a terror on the track. But for everyone else, it was practically invisible. The GTS-R was never sold outside Japan. Countries like the US rejected it due to emissions and crash test non-compliance, and its limited production made legal imports almost impossible for decades. Even today, only a handful exist outside Japan, often brought in under strict 25-year import loopholes. For years, enthusiasts whispered about it, trading parts and VINs like currency. It wasn't banned because it was dangerous. It was banned because it was unknown, and too ahead of its time for regulators to bother with. Now here's the real question. Should Nissan have kept this formula alive instead of shelving it after just 800 units? Drop a comment and let me know. Next, we move from limited production to full-blown paranoia, a sleeper sedan so powerful it got flagged simply for being too good a deal. 2. 1986 Toyota Chaser Avante Twin Turbo. It looked like something your dad would take to work, but under the hood, it had other plans. The 1986 Toyota Chaser Avante Twin Turbo was Toyota's quiet attempt at stuffing big performance into a mid-size executive sedan. While most people saw a boxy, conservative four-door, the spec sheet told a different story. It came with a 1JG TE 2.0-liter twin turbocharged inline-6, producing 185 horsepower and 173 pound-feet of torque. Impressive numbers for the era, especially from a car with no aggressive styling or flashy badging. But what really set it apart was how it delivered that power. Smooth, confident, and deceptively quick, the Chaser could keep pace with sports coupes while flying completely under the radar. It had rear-wheel drive, precise handling, and the kind of build quality that made it a long-distance killer. For Japanese enthusiasts, it was the perfect daily, practical during the week, menacing on a back road. That versatility, however, made regulators nervous, especially in countries like Australia and New Zealand, where power-to-weight restrictions for younger drivers flagged it almost immediately. Combined with limited parts support and a surge of modified imports in the early 2000s, the Chaser Avante Twin Turbo earned a spot on several insurance blacklists and import restriction rosters. And while it was never officially exported to the US, gray market units that did make it over often ran into emissions compliance issues or were turned away entirely due to murky documentation and VIN mismatches. Toyota never marketed it as a performance car, but those who knew, knew. And for a while, that made it one of the most dangerous cars to sell because it never looked like one. Coming up next, a car so rare, so powerful, and so restricted that even Toyota pretends it barely existed. It was the pinnacle of a legend, and they only built 44. 1. 1995 Nissan GTR Nismo 400R. It wasn't just the fastest Skyline ever built. It was the rarest, the most extreme, and arguably the most forbidden. The 1995 Nissan GTR Nismo 400R wasn't your average R33. This was a full-blown monster born from Nissan's racing division, Nismo, created to honor their Le Mans ambitions and push the limits of what a road car could be. Powered by a hand-assembled RBX GT2 2.8-liter twin-turbo inline-6, it produced 400 horsepower and 346 pound-feet of torque, rocketing from 0 to 60 in just 4 seconds. seconds flat. But more than raw speed, it was engineered precision, reinforced internals, racing clutch, carbon drive shaft, wide-body aero, upgraded brakes. Everything was tuned for high-speed domination. It was street legal, barely. But Nissan only built 44 units, and they didn't make it easy to get one. The car cost more than a Ferrari 355 at the time and wasn't exported outside Japan. No US crash testing, no emission certification, and if you somehow tried to import one, you were almost guaranteed to hit customs roadblocks, DOT refusals, or EPA holdups. Even now, despite the 25-year rule, most countries treat the 400R as a special case vehicle, demanding extensive paperwork, inspections, and at times, still denying road registration. Nissan never advertised it, never officially acknowledged its performance numbers. And when you ask Nismo about it today, you get silence or a careful smile. It wasn't banned in the traditional sense, but it was designed for people who knew how to find what wasn't meant to be found, and that's what makes it the ultimate car automakers don't want you to remember. Which one of these outlawed beasts would you risk sneaking past customs just for one shot at pure, unfiltered speed? Drop your pick in the comments below. And if you thought these banned Japanese machines were wild, wait till you see what's next. Hit that subscribe button, stay locked in, because the next chapter of Forgotten Legends is going to blow past everything you thought you knew.